The first time I found out about this pass was when my friend pulled right up to the front of the building. We had class and just parked their car and got out. And I was in disbelief that you could park in places that normally the layman could not.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, whenever you may be listening, and welcome to Latitude, the 43 North podcast. I'm your host, Nate Benson, Director of Media here at 43 North, and we've got a great episode for you this week. It's episode 62. 62 episodes of this podcast. I'm thrilled to do it each and every week, and make sure you shoot me an email, podcast at 43north.org, and shoot me an idea who you want to hear on this show. If you want to be on this show, if you want me to just stop talking and get right to the guests, I can do that. Just give me any feedback you want. Also, make sure you head on over to iTunes or Podbean and leave us a 5-star review. The more reviews we have, the more people will see this podcast and hear about all the great things happening in the Buffalo technology and startup scene. This week on the podcast, we have Eric Reich. He's the founder of Campus Labs and the chairman of the board here at 43 North. So what are we talking about with Eric? Well, we're talking about a lot. We're talking mainly about how Campus Labs might not actually be here if Eric didn't have a desire to have a really good parking space when he was a student at the University of Buffalo. We also talk about his vision and mission for 43 North in the next few years as he's chairman. So let's stop wasting time with me and jump right into this week's episode with Eric Reich. Eric, good morning. Thanks for joining us on the podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing great.
For those who don't know you, which is very few in Buffalo, but for the audience outside of Buffalo, give us the quick pitch of who you are and what you do.
I'm the CEO of Campus Labs, which is a big data analytics company in higher ed that colleges and universities use to learn more about their students, to improve the quality of teaching and learning, to understand how students and faculty are interacting and using the campus to everyone's hopeful goal, which is higher student retention, better graduation statistics, things that will improve the economy and the world as a whole.
What I love about the Campus Lab story, and I'd like you to kind of dive into this a little bit more, is it really started with your desire to get a good parking pass.
Yeah, no, it's definitely true. I had a friend of mine who was on the board of trustees at UB. It's called the University Council, and they got this incredible parking pass that there was only 20 or 30 of, and it was the board who got the pass and then all the deans of all the individual colleges. And the only student with the pass was this person on the board of trustees. So I really wanted the pass because anyone who's been to UB,
it's a nightmare.
The parking is the biggest problem.
It's a huge campus, a widespread campus, especially North Campus, and you can't, for whatever reason, can't find a decent parking spot.
Yeah, so the first time I found out about this pass was when my friend pulled right up to the front of the building. We had class and just parked their car and got out. And I was in disbelief that you could park in places that normally the layman could not. And so I just said, I got to get this pass. So I got myself on the board successfully. And from there, you really got to peek behind the curtain of how a large, major Research One institution works, state flagship institution. And even though back then they were operating in a very similar fashion of most universities of that type, so they weren't necessarily doing anything wrong, but they certainly weren't taking initiative to try new things and get out in front of the way data was being used on a campus. And I saw that opportunity working with that group, and with the support of the board of trustees, we were able to come up with something that was helpful to them. And now, fast forward 15 years, it's helpful to 1,500 other schools.
I was going to say, you have a touch point with pretty much every major university in North America, right?
Yeah. So every university that you would know from bowl games or from the tournament uses us in some way.
And what are they using this for on kind of an everyday purpose to kind of better their recruiting and just the overall student experience?
Well, it really doesn't have a ton to do with recruiting. The enrollment management side is a very, very complicated process that the universities use, and that's sort of out of our field of expertise, but we concentrate on what you'd call the matriculated student. So once a student arrives until once they depart. And unfortunately, there's a variety of time and reasons why students depart, and sometimes it's before they're able to graduate. At some institutions, at two-year community colleges, they depart to go to a four-year school, which is a big part of the two-year campus experience, and sometimes 2-year campuses that really have a focus on workforce development are training students to become part of the workforce. So you get your 2-year degree and you go right into a job, and that's what's intended by that group of institutions. And then at a 4-year school, for some people, the aspiration is to be in the workforce right after 4 years, and in some cases, the aspiration is graduate school or some other type of training. So what's fun about this is that every campus is trying to do something a little bit different. They have different goals. They have a different composition of their student body, but they all can improve. And when you think about it, someone has to finish last or in the bottom half of the class at Harvard. And some of those students will need some remedial services in order to make sure that they can level up to continue to stay competitive and, catch their peers at a place like Harvard. So when you think of Ivy League schools, like why would they need to do some of the work that you're talking about? It's actually the opposite. Like they have the similar type of challenge as any other school does, because there's always going to be students that are struggling, or there's always going to be faculty who could refine their teaching to connect with their audience just a little bit more. So education is such an important part of our society and such an important part of sort of building the country to what it needs to be and where it aspires to go, that it's a big problem that's worth the time and energy we're putting into it.
When you identified this problem 15 or so years ago, what was the current system like, and how did you come to that realization, like, I could really do something here to be a game changer? I mean, was everything pretty pen and paper and very antiquated?
Well, there was some pen and paper, but the bigger problem was that nothing was really happening.
It was just all this data they're collecting, and it's like into the air.
Or no data.
Yeah.
More specifically, I think no data was the primary issue, more than the data wasn't very good. Or it took too long to gather, all of those things. It's just there wasn't a discipline to doing it. There wasn't a frequency to doing it, and it was sort of a reactive process of when the campus needed to learn something or when there was a problem, rather than it being more of an everyday focus. And what's interesting is that every industry in American society has had a data awakening of some kind, and for the most part, it's been widely reported and talked about in the news. And whether in the 70s and 80s it was the proliferation of loyalty clubs, whether it was the airline loyalty clubs or supermarket loyalty clubs, and all the data that those businesses were deriving from tracking their customers and how they were using their services and the benefit both that the airlines were getting or the supermarkets were getting, and the consumers and the people who were getting the free tickets or the coupons for things that were on their list, or coupons for things that maybe based on their shopping patterns should have been on their list, right? So both sides were getting benefit. And then in the late 80s and early 90s, it was some of the discoveries that were made in medicine and pharmaceuticals based on research at a very high level in the way that you could look at data in different ways. And then in the late 90s and early 2000s, Moneyball and its application in professional sports became all the rage and talked about. But education was always way behind the curve.
Yeah.
And when you think about the amount of money and time and effort that's being spent in the area, it's sort of odd and a shame that it took so long. But the fact that we're here now is better than it never occurring. And there's so much information to look at. There's so many problems to solve. And some of them aren't even problems. Some of them are just accelerants, or doing things a little bit better, a little bit different than we've done them in the past.
What is it about data that you think scares everybody? And I ask that because, like, you watch, insert science fiction movie here of that utopian future of, an AI computer knowing everything about your day and what you need in the house and things like that. And then you, look at reality today where, there's this constant fight of, this company shouldn't know this about me, but I want this service anyway. It's like you can't really have both worlds. Data is just a scary thing to kind of the everyday person.
Well, it's either looked at as being scary or a give and take.
Yeah.
So for people who are really into, what the industry calls the quantified self, which is really understanding the most you can about yourself and getting the most amount of impact and benefit from that, people who use fitness trackers, who wear Fitbits, or use the Sleep Number mattress, right? It's everywhere.
Yeah.
And there's benefit to doing some of those things, but you know that that data is out there, and you know that data is being looked at, and it's also being looked at in aggregate so that other people other than you could benefit from your experience. And usually those things are happening anonymously or at a minimum confidentially. But it definitely is a give and take. The benefits are significant, but you have to be willing to be okay with the idea that some of those things are in fact being tracked. And tracked might not be the right word, and that might sound a little bit more ominous than it really needs to be. But there are certainly benefits, but it's not without the risk, or at least anxiety for some.
So, what was the goal for Campus Labs early on? Was it grow as quickly as you can, sell and move on? Was it to get investment? What was your strategy? I mean, coming out of college as an entrepreneur at a time when there's so much chaos going on in the world. The war on terror is starting, and so much craziness. Here you are trying to do a startup in Western New York.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't the best timing. I can tell you that much, because
coming off the tech bubble bursting, and
we came off the tech bubble bursting, and then shortly thereafter was September 11th, and there wasn't a lot of stuff going on from an investment standpoint, and we had never raised an institutional round. We never raised real VC money or sort of sophisticated investor capital. And that was the goal the entire time. That provided us with an incredible amount of control, but also accountability, right? So you don't have investors that are leading you down the right path, but you also don't have investors that are leading you down the wrong path. So we were fully accountable for what it is that we were doing and what it is that we were producing, with absolutely no excuses. So when you're in a situation like that, in my opinion, it brings out the best. Unless you can't handle those circumstances. So we were able to handle it, and then there was a huge economic downturn in 2007, 2008. So we were successful and doing really, really well, even though we were being tested by two of the most difficult business climates in American history up to that point, certainly in the last 30, 40, 50 years of the economy.
You did have some pretty influential mentors, though, during that time, too. Jordan Levy being one of them, right?
Yeah, Jordy was very, very helpful and instrumental in our success. We were meeting with him on a fairly regular basis, but his travel schedule and different obligations that he had made it difficult. And at that time, we had our office in a single room in Amherst. And Jordy was working in the Key. Then it was called the Key Center, and there was a very, very small office on his floor that was vacant. That was really unlikely to be rented by anyone else, because it was one of the nicest buildings in Buffalo, and you would have really had to have been a very efficient and very successful law firm to be able to pay those rates and get that small of a suite. And Jordy called the building's management team and basically asked if we could use that space for basically nothing, so that he could drop in and see what we were up to and spend more time interacting with us, even though his time in Buffalo wasn't plentiful. And remarkably, the building said yes, and we were able to move in there. And it was a lot of fun because, that building was the nicest building in Buffalo, and whether it was Delaware North in that building or Morgan Stanley or Merrill Lynch,
it's a staple of downtown.
It's a staple of downtown, but we were also, riding the elevator in our T-shirts and hoodies with everyone in a suit,
Getting stared.
But we were getting stared, but after a while, people knew who we were, and you sort of felt like, a rock star of sorts, right? That you were amongst the Buffalo business elite, and we're sort of the renegade or the new way of building a company inside of this, very corporate or very traditional setting. So from that point of view, it was really a lot of fun and part of what drove us to be successful every day, because we were starting to become a known quantity, and that put the right amount of pressure on us to make sure that we were delivering.
Was there ever a point, especially when the economy kind of started tanking in 07, was there a point where things got super lean and just, I don't know if this is going to work out anymore, maybe I got to get out while the getting's good and move on to something else?
Well, there was never a point where we were worried about the future of the company, because we were working really hard and we were having a tremendous amount of success. Part of that had to do with the relentlessness and the tenacity you need when you have a new entity and you just have no choice. And part of it is the narrative around what the product was. And data is an interesting thing and an interesting being, because when things aren't going well, data is just so important. So you talk about some of these college campuses were maybe operating in a more lean fashion than they had previously. But that meant that the information they were getting was really, really important, because they only had so many resources. They had a tremendous amount of scrutiny on their budget, so they really had to make the right decision. So then data became even more important to them. So a service like ours was even more emphasized.
So it didn't seem like an extra for those college campuses that were, dealing with budget, issues on their own. This became a crucial item for their, workflow on a day-to-day basis.
Right, because things were so scarce.
Yeah.
It became more of a need to have. The flip side of the economy was that after a little while, what started to happen in the way that education became one of the leaders in getting us out of that economy is that the hiring nationwide was slowed, was curbed. So a lot of people who were leaving high school were actually going to college as an alternative to getting a job, or realizing that a job might not have been in their future. And if they could go to school and be credentialed at a higher level, and also sort of waiting for the economy to come back. So while at the beginning, the data project was its own assistive resource to these campuses, and they needed it and wanted to buy it in order for them to understand where to place their bets from a budgetary standpoint. What happened after that was that a lot more kids were going to college.
Yeah.
So actually their budgets became more enhanced than they had seen in a long time. And that came at a time where we were continuing to build our offerings and moving with more product offerings horizontally inside of the company. So from that point of view, the fact that we were able to gut it out for so long and that we had established a great reputation in the market, at one point it all sort of aligned where the company was really working and we were expanding to so many campuses, and then these campuses were getting an influx of resources and a increase in their student enrollments that they hadn't seen in a long time because the jobs just weren't there. And all those things happening at the same time is really what made the company explode and get much bigger than we ever thought was possible. So
either deliberately or by happy accident, you found an industry, of course, not knowing there was going to be the biggest recession since the Great Depression on the horizon. You were able to kind of find something that wasn't impacted by that, correct?
Yeah, well, it was impacted just in a little bit of a different way.
Right.
And there's a lot of stories that are told about entrepreneurial activity and how companies are built. They're all partially benefiting from some type of happy accident.
Yeah.
So it works that way for everyone, where it's a mix of theory and hypothesis with hard work and luck and timing.
And hoping for the best.
And well, everyone's hoping for the best, but even the best stories, even the Googles and the Facebooks and the Airbnbs had a couple of moments where something happened that really, really worked for them that they didn't expect, or that just happened naturally because of their hard work. Like, it doesn't happen without those things being orchestrated by the people who are running those entities and who see those opportunities. So that none of it happens by accident, but it's a mix for everybody. And I think it's a big part of learning about what makes for the entrepreneurial journey is that luck and that timing. Now, the entrepreneurs create it; it doesn't come from nowhere.
Right.
But anyone who says that all of their success is attributed to very, very specific intentional movements that those people made inside of the market are fooling themselves and trying to make more of it than they deserve.
Looking at Campus Labs today, just about 200 employees, a brand new, or relatively new downtown Buffalo multi-story campus and headquarters. Did you think you'd get to this point? Was there some sort of inflection point where like, okay, we have to go full throttle. I need to get every developer I possibly can in the region working for me, or was it a very we got 2 more accounts, so I need now 4? Was it a gradual thing, or was it a holy shit, I gotta ramp up now?
No, it was definitely gradual, but I don't think we ever had any preconceived notion of what it was going to be, whether it was going to be a smaller business with a smaller team, or whether it was really going to get big. Once you start growing nationwide, you got to have a bigger team, because you got to have a diverse group of people with a diverse set of responsibilities and diverse set of experiences. If you just hire locally, for instance, and we work with campuses all across the country, and if you're at UCLA or you're at USC or the University of Washington, in Seattle, or Oregon or Oregon State, you can't always call our office and be talking to someone who is familiar with the education system in New York State or in the Northeast. Right. You got to have a little bit of geographic diversity, and then you have to have diversity from all different kinds of backgrounds, because colleges truly are a mix. There are first-generation students, so students whose parents did not go to college. There are international students. There are people who are there for all different reasons, and our workforce needs to reflect that. So we're really proud that we've grown, and that we're really proud that we've grown in Buffalo and have been able to be a great employer and build this incredible office. But we're really proud of the diverse nature of the team. And that means that we've moved a lot of people to Buffalo from other areas. And it's also meant that we've had an emphasis that makes sure that the team that we have here is reflective of the team we're working on or working with on all these college campuses.
My impression is company culture is also very important to you. Just for the times I've been at the Campus Labs headquarters, very, quote unquote Silicon Valley looking, workspace. Everyone seems to be thrilled to be there. Is that one of those intentional things that you're really focused on, making sure your employees are the happiest they can be?
Yeah, that was definitely an emphasis from the beginning. Culture is just so important. Culture is what sets the tempo for the company. It's what sets the realistic attainment possibilities. It's what keeps everyone motivated and excited and working towards the same goal. So culture has always been an emphasis for us, and I'm asked to speak a lot or get connected with people who are building companies, and whenever I'm asked for advice or what to spend some time on and what to emphasize, culture is always at the top of the list, because I know personally how that's benefited us, but more so when you talk to other entrepreneurs, when you read the stories of how they became successful or how they got to where they wanted to go. Culture is just so important, because the team, the people who are going to make it happen that's the company, even more so than the product. Like, the products will catch up, the products will evolve, the customer relationships will evolve. But the people who are doing that work, the people who are the touch point of the company in the market, like, that's what matters. And if those people are aligned, if those people understand what they're doing and why they're doing it, and if they have a connection to it, if the company is a mission-based company like we are, that's what makes great results.
Now, I know you could talk about Campus Labs for another 20 minutes or so, but I want to shift gears a little bit. Once Campus Labs got established, you're pretty much not going anywhere. You start kind of venturing out a little bit more. You joined the board at 43 North, and now you're the current chairman of 43 North. Why get involved outside of kind of the Campus Labs space and get involved in the business community and startup community in Western New York?
Yeah, it's funny that we talked earlier about my interactions with Jordy, but back when we were in the Key Center and Jordy was around a fair bit, Jordy was very, very active in a lot of civic and philanthropic initiatives in Buffalo, whether that was the beginnings of Canal Side, the work he was doing with the Albright Knox. He was very, very active with the Bills and Sabres at the times when those franchises, place in Buffalo was uncertain. So he was doing a lot of different things. And I would always beg him. I'd say, I want to get involved in doing some of these things. I want to be on some boards. I want to do what I can to help. And he looked at me one day and said, look, if you want to do the best thing for Buffalo, if you really want to make an impact, create jobs. I don't want you distracted in any way from doing anything else other than building your company and creating jobs. And that's what we did. And it was good advice that I wasn't distracted. But then it got to the point where, a new era of leadership or a new demographic of leadership in Buffalo needed to emerge. And then Jordy and Bill leaned on me to say, we need to make sure that we have some new people coming up through the system that are willing to spend some time and some effort to make sure that this community continues to be a vibrant place and a place that we all know about and we all love, but that we make the right strides from a sustainability standpoint. So I guess I graduated where it was previous just focus on your business. Now all of a sudden it was now we need your help. But that was a very, very gratifying call to get, and I was happy to do it, and has been a very, very enjoyable and gratifying and enriching experience in my professional life.
So did you know what you're getting into when you decided to be chairman at 43 North?
A little bit. I got to spend a couple years on the board, really learning it and understanding what we were trying to do, and get the benefit of seeing things that worked really well and also seeing some mistakes that we made or things that didn't work out as well as we would have liked. So I feel like I'm very well prepared, that I've spent the time and definitely have the interest. And the team at 483 North and the rest of the board are just incredible. It has to be the greatest collection of successful entrepreneurs in Buffalo in a long, long time, and those people who are really dedicated and focused on building and what can be. There aren't a lot of people in Buffalo who understand how to build a company, understand its complexity and how difficult that is. And to have all those people in the same room, working to build 43 North as an entity, but also as a resource for the companies who apply and the companies who win and the companies that we incubate going forward, is really great to be a part of, and really special to be leading, certainly.
When you talk about looking forward in vision, as chairman, honing in on a focus and a vision of 43 North is kind of a big component of that. You've had some time, under the chairmanship now to meet with the staff and talk with Alex Gress, the president. What's the future for 43 North like, and what's your vision for it?
Yeah, I'm very excited about the results that we've had thus far. When you look at an application period that is just about to close. Yeah. But we're getting better applicants than we've ever gotten, because we've learned that the criteria for what makes for a successful applicant, as you whittle down to the finalist group, is different than it probably was a couple of years ago, where quantity was more important and we wanted to get thousands and thousands of applications. Now we'd rather just get the right kinds of applications, even if it's in lower numbers, because in order to get those type of applicants, you're almost balancing, running an application process with recruiting companies, encouraging them to apply, and that takes a tremendous amount of time and energy and resources to make that work, especially if you're trying to get the best of the best companies that are available for this type of effort. So, I think that we're definitely on the right track there, and that's something that I definitely believe in, of that shift to be almost more of a recruiting engine than we are, running a competition where everyone apply. There's certainly times where companies apply and we're like, wow, this idea is really, really interesting. We never even heard of these people, and we're really excited about how their candidacy will be viewed by the judges, because when the judges get it, they have no idea, like, was this recruited by 43 North?
Yeah, they just see a company.
They just see a company, right? They have no idea of the backstory. So that's a really interesting mix to learn about that process. But so I think that we're starting to get the right type of companies. And then I also think that the emphasis on how those companies are mentored and brought along once they're here is really, really important. And in the future, I don't think anyone's going to remember the companies who applied that didn't make it. But they will remember the companies who were on the stage and what became of those companies, and how many people from those companies are in Buffalo, and what those companies look like, and how they're part of our local economy, and just the local business scene of of having a tremendous amount of history and longevity with some generational companies that have been in Buffalo. We need more of those. We need more new companies, and I think 43 North is a big part of that balance that we have between things that have always been here and things that are traditional and important and that we all consider to be institutions in Buffalo, and making sure we supplement them with new entrants and new leaders and new people to come to our area.
You've got to be pretty encouraged, especially since 43 North made that shift of quality over quantity. When that was first implemented, 2015, 16-ish, it took a full cycle of companies being incubated. Now when you walk in the incubator, looking at the 2017 winners, and it's only been 6 months, and we're running out of space because they're growing, that's got to be pretty encouraging. And it's like, okay, something's, it's working for us.
Yeah, no, it's encouraging to get those results. The hard part is waiting for it to happen. Not because we're not moving as fast as we can, but you make some changes to the methodology, then you have to have the competition, and then you have to see whether those changes really worked, right? Yeah. So that's a long process when you only do the competition once a year.
Yeah, it's hard for people to understand, I think, especially who aren't in this every day. It's like you make a decision, let's say January 1, 2018, for a competition that begins in 19, and then you don't see the results until 2020.
Right. And that's something that's interesting that, I think that the community as a whole needs to understand about this initiative, is that patience is going to be really, really important for the reasons that you just talked about, as far as how quickly adjustments can be seen as positive, or see the real fruits of that learning, but also in the way that these companies grow. Like Campus Labs has been, in existence for 15 years, and we just got to 200 people, right? That's a long time. And I think that as we're looking at some of these companies and how they're built, I remember it probably took Campus Labs 6 or 7 years just to get to 15 people or 20 people, right? It just takes a long time. And none of these entities can be created in an instant. And every story that you read about in the mainstream media that showcases Airbnb or Facebook or Uber as an overnight success, they're all overnight successes, 10 years in the making. Yeah. And that entrepreneurial journey, there aren't a lot of people who really understand the truth of how that works, because it does get a little sensationalized, in the press and in the media. But patience is going to be important. But if you do the right things and you do them with the right sort of tempo and expectation, that's when the magic can happen. It's when you try to rush things for the sake of rushing it, that good ideas can go sideways or go haywire. So patience is important, and discipline is important too. And those things sort of go hand in hand. That if you have a company and you're convicted that your idea or your application of this idea is the right idea, trying to do other things or trying to move too fast can really undermine your ability to execute it. So patience and discipline and staying on track are hallmarks to successful entrepreneurial ventures, but there's certainly applications to that we have to remember when we're looking at our own work at 43 North.
So when you look back on everything, was the parking pass worth it?
Well, the parking pass was definitely worth it, and it's funny. It's funny the way that things work, but that's usually the way things work. Whether it was the beginnings of eBay around Pez dispensers, or Airbnb to find a place to crash in a foreign city, or Facebook to get introduced to other students in college in a way that was much more efficient, or where it reached more people than just meeting people in the dining hall. Like, all of these ideas start off as really simple things, serendipitous, simple things that happen. So it's sort of funny to really think about the basis and the beginnings of some of those ideas, and the fact that ours is definitely Buffalo centric is a lot of fun, and the fact that we were doing something that didn't necessarily have an immediate commercial application or commercial appeal, that it really was something that was sincere and legitimate and a grassroots idea that blossomed as a result of the support that we got from the college campus community. Like all of those things added together is what makes for a successful venture. You have to have that degree of authenticity and sincerity for it to really connect with the customer base.
Well, Eric, thanks for joining us on the podcast this week. We're going to see you on stage at Shea's emceeing and wheeling and dealing like Maggio, right, this year?
I don't know. I'm more of a behind-the-curtain guy than front of the curtain, but, I know Bill. Bill is just such an eloquent speaker, and he is so inspiring and motivating to hear speak. I'm going to make sure that Bill and Jordy are up there for a lot of it, but as the leader, I'm going to have to be up there to do something. But I want the teams to be the stars, and we're there to support them and we're there to keep it moving. But I want the emphasis to be on the teams and the great entrepreneurs that we're going to be bringing to Buffalo.
All right, Eric, we'll catch up with you down the road. Thanks for joining us today on the podcast.
Likewise.
Cheers. I want to thank Eric again for joining me on the podcast this week. If you want to learn more about all the great things that Campus Labs is doing with data for universities across North America, head on over to campuslabs.com and 43north.org for all things 43 North related. Thanks again for listening to the podcast. Head on over to iTunes, leave a 5-star review, and feel free to shoot me an email, podcast@43north.org. Why would you do that? Well, if you have any feedback for me, any potential guests, if you want to be a guest, there's no shame in plugging yourself to be on this show. Thanks again for listening. For 43 North, I'm Nate Benson, and we'll see you at the next one.